Welcome to the Omnibus Show, a program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. And now your host, Dave Gibbs.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Omnibus Show, the program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. Today's guest is Darrin Murrell. He's the Associate Artistic Director at the Actors Theater of Indiana, which we call ATI. He has worked as a professional actor, director, producer, and educator for over 30 years in theaters across the country, with extensive work in Chicago and in Portland, Oregon. He made his directorial debut at ATI in the program Unnecessary Farce here in Carmel. He's had some of his well-known parts have been as Alfie Doolittle in My Fair Lady and Murray the Cop in The Odd Couple. And he's also been at Beef and Boards here in a variety of programs. And you've directed a number of shows at many theaters. So welcome, Darrin. It's good to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, great. Well, I'm just going to let you go to it. You have a wide and extensive career that has just covered many aspects of theater. And please tell us about what started you in theater.
Well, I was born and raised here in East Central Indiana, a little more rural than where we are right now, in a farm community east of Muncie.
Okay. And
very small rural high school experience there. But I was fortunate in a couple of ways, one of which is my grandfather, who I fairly well idolized. He was a World War II veteran, and I think part of that World War II experience had informed his entertainment likes and choices. He loved the old vaudeville performers who had made the transition into radio and television and movies, people like the Marx Brothers and Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy and folks like Cary Grant and Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And so I grew up watching those people on movies, on television, and really loved that sort of old-fashioned style of comedy, of entertainment. I was particularly drawn to comedy. And then I was fortunate in high school to have a couple of English teachers who ran the high school drama program. And I was able to get involved through that and started performing. I guess I knew even before high school that that entertainment was something that I really wanted to do. And I guess sitting here kind of putting those pieces together, it occurs to me that my grandfather didn't talk much about his war experience. I have since learned a lot about his war experience, which is fascinating. He served with a rather renowned army company in the war that worked the entire Pacific theater from the Aleutian Islands up near Alaska all the way down through the Marshall Islands and around into the Philippines and eventually to Okinawa. At any rate, the things he talked about from his war experience was when he was wounded in the hospital in Hawaii, USO shows would come through. And he remembered those USO shows. He remembered details about them. And whenever we would watch, Bob Hope doing his Christmas specials for the troops and on location in Vietnam and things like that, those were times when my grandpa would get sort of animated about, his memories of some of those USO type shows.
Sure.
And I would never even hope to dream about having the kind of impact on society that he and his comrades gave through their service and their sacrifice. But if my bit in life could be the person who gets them to laugh in the face of that horror, perhaps that's worthy in some way, to be able to kind of provide the respite or the distraction for the people who are doing the real work in the world. So that was maybe in some way foundationally inspirational. And then to find the outlet through my high school mentors. And then one of them said to me as I was getting ready for summer of my junior year, she said, there's a summer stock theater just up the road in this little town, Hagerstown, Indiana. They do shows in a tent. And of course, back in the late 40s through the 60s and even the early 70s, tent theaters were a staple of sort of the entertainment landscape. There were tent theaters, especially back east. In the summer, they would spring up in little beach communities and tourist towns and things like that. And major Broadway stars would come and play their shows in the tent. So there was a little tent theater right near where I lived, and so I drove over there and, with no idea how it worked, walked into their offices and said, "Hey, I like doing this kind of thing." And they said, "Well, sing for us." And I sang a little thing, and they said, "Okay, you can be in the chorus and work props and have this tech work that you have to do, but you can be in the chorus of the shows." And so I had that professional summer stock experience before I was even out of high school, and then met people that summer who were on career tracks, who were either in or just graduated from or had college experience in their past and were building a career and playing the leads in the shows. And they were from out of town. They were from Chicago, from New York. And I just ate up everything they had to say about how they got to where they were and the career that they were imagining in front of them, and realized that this is perhaps an actual career path of some kind, as scattershot as it might be. So I just continued to follow that path.
Did you have a favorite experience from the tent theaters when you did summer stock? Is there a particular one that stands out to you?
Well, there are many flooding my mind as we're speaking. I'm trying to decide which ones are appropriate.
Something appropriate for we have a family crowd.
Right. This one is rather gruesome, but it certainly conveys the spirit of the entire enterprise. So we were in the round. So if you can imagine a large tent, and the stage was in the middle of the tent with a pole going up the middle of the stage. So you had to work around the pole, and we were in the round. So there was audience on all four sides, and
you can't escape.
No, and if you had to leave one side, and you were staged to come in the next entrance from the other side, you had to run around the outside of the tent. In the middle of this little town, in this downtown district, run around the tent and come to the other side. And if it was raining, there were like umbrellas, and you had to grab an umbrella and take it with you as you were coming around the tent. And often it would get quite chaotic. And we were doing this one show where the entirety of the set pieces were big trunks. The show was George M. It was the biography of George M. Cohan, great vaudeville innovator, one of the fathers of musical comedy. And we're coming into the big finale. So they were all these like vaudeville show trunks that would stack on top of each other and become different things for the different scenes. And the guy playing George, the lead, for this finale was in a all white tailcoat, tuxedos, white tailcoat, white vest, shirt, tie, white hat, the whole 9 yards. As we're making this chaotic scene change, people carrying these boxes, somehow backstage there's a collision. And when we all end up on stage and look up to George at the top of the boxes, he steps up, And it looked like a horror show. There was blood staining his white tailcoat and kind of running. He wasn't hurt badly, but one of those boxes had scraped him somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And the blood was just all over
his white suit.
His white suit, so it was unmistakable. And the audience gasped. And he said, "Hooray for the red, white, and blue," and was just kept the show right on going. But the moral is, the show keeps going.
It keeps going.
No matter what, something has to happen.
Yes.
And everybody pitches in to make it happen. So that's what I took from those experiences.
Wow. And then you moved on, and then you grew in your career. And what was next?
Well, sort of an itinerant actor in my youth. I lived in, you probably name any region or major city in the country, and I spent some time doing either touring children's theater or some 3-month contract here and a 4-month contract there. But I ended up landing actually somebody that I had worked with in one of those early summer stock experiences. Their hometown was in upstate New York, this beautiful community called Rome, New York. Kind of sits in between Utica, or in between Albany and Syracuse. It's right near Utica. And they had a grand old vaudeville theater there, old movie house theater, the Capitol Theater. And it had been in disrepair and disuse and really hadn't been used since the 40s. Last time it was used, it was a radio studio they had up on the mezzanine balcony. And a church had been in there for a while, but it was falling apart. So they were going to tear it down, and the city said, no, all our memories. And so the mayor at the time got the city council to go. They bought it. They bought the property. And he knew that my friend, Joe, who'd grown up there, had gone on to have this career in theater. So he reached out and said, "Hey, would you come back? We'll commission you to come back and help us bring this theater back to some kind of life." So Joe reached out then to some of the folks he had worked with over the last number of years and said, "Would you guys like to come and help be a part of this? Here's this budget the city's put aside." So I was one of the people that came in, and we literally dusted the place off, like literally beating dust out of the seats, and we tore, don't tell OSHA, but we ripped that radio studio out of that mezzanine balcony. We were probably covered with asbestos and just tossing it into dumpsters out the back door. But we got it back into shape. We opened a summer stock theater there. But then that was similar to the summer stock experience. It was everybody doing whatever they needed to do to get it done, and we had a deadline, and it opened, and it was a huge, everybody came, 2,500 seat auditorium.
Wow.
Was sold out for many nights of the runs of those initial shows. And the community was just thrilled to death. So we had to keep it going. So I was maybe one of two people out of the company that didn't have future commitments after that summer. So I stuck around, and we had to figure out how to make a business out of this theater. And that was something that none of the classes I took in college prepared me for. That, there's not a lot of resource, especially back in the day, before there were available resources. Certainly the local library in Rome, New York had no books on how to make a successful, profitable theater.
How to make a successful theater in 3 easy steps.
Exactly. So we made it up as we went along, kind of reached out and got resources. And so I was suddenly a programming director and figuring out how to program and bring shows in. We did a partnership with the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra and became one of their roadshow stops. And we got the movie projector working again and started doing movie nights, which was huge success in the community. Got a couple of touring companies, kid shows to come in, and then they would we would bring in busloads of kids for a school matinee. And we did some community theater, a couple of community theater shows and a big family holiday show. But that was where I started to learn what it was to be a producer. What does that mean? Because it's kind of an amorphous title, and it can mean different things in different situations. But what it means is, the bottom line is, you're responsible for everything. The box office, the house management, the cleaning the dressing rooms, the making sure there's ticket stock to be printed, and getting the stories out to the newspaper, and everything else.
You're the president. You pay the taxes.
Exactly. So that was an incredible learning experience there. Also kind of started the education section, because one of the things I certainly recognized, one of the shows we did that first season was Annie. Right.
Okay.
And
that's a classic.
Right. And one of the reasons that particular show sold out every night, and it was pretty obvious, was it was the families of all these kids coming. And so, not a complete dummy, I realized that, if the kids are involved, they're bringing the income in the audience. And if you want success, you got to have some involvement with the kids at some level. So we started, there was no local children's theater education classes, workshops. That at the time, even, that wasn't a these days you can find an acting class for your kids pretty easily. Back in the day, it was not so.
Cat here.
Well, and to be sure, back in the day, they were getting a lot of that experience in school. There were arts in the curriculum. There were, I remember in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, part of our lesson plans were to dramatize whatever story we were reading, Stone Soup, or, The Legend of Davy Crockett, or whatever it was. We'd read the thing, and then at some point the teacher would have us get up and act out little scenes from it. And that was part of the curriculum. It was baked into it, so kids had an understanding. Or you were painting some impression of a thing, or working out geometry by building some popsicle stick structure. But it was arts-based learning.
Right.
And that's gone for the most part. And so, going back to Rome, we started a young actors workshop program, and not only did it bring the sort of the commercial success that we were looking for in terms of building audience and bringing people through the door and getting community involvement, but it also became a surprisingly enriching aspect of the job for me. And subsequently then, almost every other opportunity I had from that point moving forward, that I could incorporate some sort of young actors workshop, an educational element to whatever programming I was doing. I always did that for all of those reasons, but selfishly because it was really enriching to see the light bulbs go off in the kids' heads and see the understanding of, and it really comes down to moments of empathy when you see a young person suddenly realize that this voice that they're giving to this character they're reading has a viewpoint that's different than theirs, and that they are able to wrap their heads around that sentence, that idea, that notion, and give it life, even though it's maybe not necessary, it wouldn't necessarily have come out of them naturally. And that's a life-changing moment when you can really step into somebody else's shoes and see the world from a different perspective. I think that changes lives and communities, and I think it's important.
Well, you had a change of perspectives, didn't you? Because from New York, you carried on to places like Chicago and into Portland.
Yeah.
I know you have many stories, and that you had some very fascinating stories from
Chicago was a really rich experience. That was kind of, I had moved up in my career a little bit and was working with a major theatrical production company in Chicago called Fox Theatricals, and their parent company was the fabulous Fox Theater down in St. Louis, which was the mothership of all of the fabulous Fox theaters around the country in Atlanta and Detroit, and there's some of the great show palaces of the 20th century. And they had sort of consolidated ownership and programming into this conglomerate out of St. Louis. And that company had formed its own theatrical division housed in Chicago. That was Fox Theatricals, and that's who I worked for. And the producer that they had hired to run that organization in Chicago was a guy called Mick Leavitt. And he was kind of an up-and-coming producer-director in Chicago. He had a partner, Wes Payne, and Payne Leavitt Productions had some success programming at the great old Mercury Theater space there on Southport, and it was the Wellington, the Ivanhoe at a couple different times. But they had some good successes, and so Mick got tapped as the executive producer, and I was on the staff. I was initially the assistant to the executive producer. I was Mick's personal assistant. So I was in the room and advising and helping and providing documents and whatever else needed to be done for all of the major deals he was making as a producer, the communications he was having with the artistic teams, and cultivating some of the artistic staffing. And so this started to touch on like celebrity level involvement in the business, which is really fun, and those are great stories. But I got to work with people like on the sort of author side or production side, people like Neil Simon and Eric Bogosian and Michael Maggio is just a great Chicago institution of a director, and all the great folks at the Steppenwolf and the Second City. We had collaborations with them, worked with Steve Carell and Jackie Hoffman on a show at the Apollo, and then entertainers like Mickey Rooney and Marlo Thomas and
that girl.
Yes, absolutely. And got to meet Phil Donahue a couple of times, and he was in town for the opening of the shows or whatever. But at any rate, John Aston. I have to mention John Aston, just one of the great people in show business. Yeah, and boy, oh man, what an amazing human being. He was just terrific. But at any rate, great experiences all around that, and eventually I kind of leveled up in that organization. I was eventually the director of marketing and advertising for all of their various shows, and they owned 5 off-loop professional theaters, and the Royal George and the Apollo and the Briar Street and the Wellington, Ivanhoe. And then eventually started to get involved downtown in Loop when they started renovating some of the Cadillac Palace and things like that. But my involvement was when they were doing those off-loop theaters, and they were doing the first runs of Broadway shows. So a show would happen on Broadway, let's say in the spring. By the fall, we were producing the Chicago company of whatever that Broadway show was. Yeah. And we had relationships with several authors and or producers to do their works. Neil Simon was one, David Mamet was one that we worked with frequently, and Ken Ludwig. We did Lend Me a Tenor. I want to say for at least 8 years at the Apollo.
Wow.
We opened it immediately after the Broadway run, and then eventually far surpassed the Broadway one. But that was one where we kept looping in celebrities to take over the lead role to encourage new audiences to come see a show they've already seen.
Because they
maybe seen
would
it
bring
twice.
in their people.
Right. But you saw it with John Aston. Won't you come see it with Mickey Rooney? And come see what Jamie Farr does with the part. Will he put on a dress and be Klinger? But we would just keep rolling celebrities in to kind of keep the show moving.
Sure.
And but also at the same time, we were working with new works, people with new ideas, and had some great experiences kind of fostering new pieces into the world. A couple of great biographical pieces. This was kind of before biomusicals and jukebox musicals around a catalog were much of a thing, but we had this great show, Woody Guthrie's American Song, all about Woody Guthrie and his journey. We were early part of the team for Love Janis, the Janis Joplin musical that was collaborating with her sister and the letters that she had from Janis, and that was really cool. And we'd mentioned off there, they had a little film division for a while, Fox Theatricals. They tried to split off a little film division, and through that I got to meet and work with a very young up-and-coming Tracy Letts, who has since gone to amazing critical acclaim with shows like August Osage County and has won Pulitzer Prize but he had submitted to our film division this zombie script. A very funny kind of zombie parody. That was it was hilarious. I wish we could have followed through with that. But Chicago kind of taught me that at that level, because I'm working with people like Neil Simon and Mickey Rooney and David Mamet and whatever, and the lesson learned there was the basic. The art is the same. The process is roughly the same, whether you're at a tent in the middle of a cornfield in Indiana, or if you're at the Royal George Theater with a premiere of a Neil Simon show with a big name celebrity in it. The stuff happening backstage and the struggles to get it mounted with technical issues and actor egos and script revisions and all the things that go into making the show. Same thing. Same process, just different surroundings. There's no like, oh, this is what it is. It's the same thing.
It's always the real thing.
That's what it is. Yeah.
We're just adding salsa this week.
That's exactly right. And it's the changes, how much money is being invested into the project, which means how much money do you have to invest in selling this product to its audience, which translates into the size of the audience you get based on how well you've gotten the word out, and that's just all about how much money you have to promote it.
As the late Diana Rigg would say, it's bums on chairs, right, and seats.
Yep, and it's how you sell it. I mean, you know, like I said, we were selling that same show over and over and over again to the same people, and that's the business. That's the business of the show business. Now that changes depending on what level you're at. If you're in a nonprofit, small, community-based organization, the resources you have available to you and the number of people you have writing checks and wanting their name attached to it, and that changes. And that really is the determining factor about kind of the scale that you're actually working in. But on the artistic level, the core of it remains true across those different platforms of money and resource.
So you've gotten to see how the sausage was made, and you still like it.
Well, then after Chicago, what we did, I'd met my wife where we were working just outside of Chicago at a theater, and that's where we met, and we decided to make a fresh start of it. And I'd been in Chicago for a while then, and honestly, at that point, I was working at a level in the organization where I was completely disconnected from that art. All the stuff we just talked about being consistent and true, I was now working so far away from that I felt like I was losing my connection to why I was doing it. It was just all about spreadsheets
business
and numbers
finance,
right. And so we decided to make a fresh start of it. We almost threw a dart at the map. It was almost that random.
The Bay City Rollers.
Right. Well, she had gotten her undergrad at University of British Columbia in Vancouver.
Okay.
She's from Canada and got her undergrad there in UBC and had an affinity for the Pacific Northwest. I'd never really been out there, so we looked at Seattle, and it seemed like at that time it was maybe a little oversaturated. So we dropped down to Portland and said, let's give it a shot, and went out and just loved the community so much. It was home, and it was the people we met there were of a similar mind as us, and at that time it was in this growth and development stage as a community. As we were driving into town, there were construction cranes and big sponsorship banners, like everywhere you looked, money was being poured into.
This been in the 90s or 2000s?
Yeah, or late 90s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, exactly.
I lived in Seattle for a short stint. I knew Vancouver very well, but I'd been down to Portland around that time. And it was really in a transition.
And they were supporting those corporate level folks. Were supporting the arts. Arts were a major focus of that community. And there were new theater companies popping up all the time. There were really successful, thriving storefront type theaters that I was used to from Chicago, but also like large scale children's theater programs and large regional theater programs. And so we really felt at home, and we decided to start our own company there, and built it from the ground up. And one of the first places we saw when we drove into town was this sort of beautiful natural space at the top of this big hill that overlooks the city, and there's a park up there, the Rose Garden Park. And it's a rose test garden, and there's all these varieties of unique roses being grown. And then there's like this sloping thing, and there's this big concrete platform, and then behind the platform is a vista of Mount Hood and all of the skyline of downtown Portland and the bridges and the river, and it's just the most picturesque location. And we were like, boy, that'd be cool to do a show right there on that concrete platform.
Oh yeah.
By the second year we were there, we were producing a show on that big concrete platform.
Very fun.
We kind of reverse engineered and figured out it was a Parks and Recreation facility, and discovered that Portland Parks and Recreation already had an arts and theater program within their curriculum. At some of their indoor park facilities. They would offer workshops, improv workshops, and story building workshops, and whatever. So we proposed taking a program like that, building a program in one of their indoor spaces, and then using it as a mentorship program where the teachers were professional actors, and they were developing a show, a large-scale production, and then teaching the kids a junior version of that same show at the same time they were learning it, so they could help each other and discover and learn from each other, you know, the arcs of these characters and the storyline and things like that. And then both groups would have the opportunity to perform their version of the show in some big outdoor beautiful space. And one of those ended up being that Rose Garden Amphitheater. And then on the other side of town, there's an old volcano crater that has a natural amphitheater space right in the mouth of the dormant volcano, and called Mount Tabor Park. And we did a couple of weeks of the shows up in the Rose Garden, and then hauled them all down to Mount Tabor and did a couple of weeks of shows down there. And
did a volcanic experience.
Absolutely.
Performance.
But that was really rewarding and successful. And my wife and I got to work with many of the great theater institutions around Portland at the time, and still maintain deep friendships there, and hope to get back there someday.
Well, that's great. Well, Darrin, thank you so much. Well, we're going to take a brief break right now, and we'll be back with Chapter 2 with Darrin Murrell on the Omnibus Show. Hello and welcome back to this episode of the Omnibus Show. Today's guest is Darrin Murrell, who is the Associate Artistic Director at Actors Theater of Indiana, also known as ATI. Well, you've told us a great story of your wide experience in Chapter 1. Now bringing it home to Indiana for Chapter 2, and when you've come to ATI, and you've had different experience. You've been a director. You've also been on stage in My Fair Lady and The Odd Couple.
And many others.
And many others. Also at Beef and Boards, another theater. Can you tell us some highlights coming in back to Indiana?
Sure. Well, we made the decision to move back here. As much as we loved Portland, my wife and I decided to start a family. And my parents still live here in Indiana, over near Muncie. And so we wanted them to have the chance to be grandparents and kind of be able to lean on family for some of that early years. So we made the decision to come back here. Moved on to my family's homestead farm property over near Muncie. They had settled that land in 1850, and
wow.
and our family's been on it consistently since.
That's bringing it home.
Yeah, completely. The house that we have lived in now for the last 20 years, in fact, the bones of it are the same timber my ancestors chopped off the creek and built that original house with. And it's a little updated, but it's still rustic living. Certainly not my experience from Chicago and Portland, but
of course.
But we came back for this whole new experience. So, and the kids have had a great experience growing up there, sprawling farmland and like say woods and a creek and just their run of the place. And so it was great upbringing, and now they're kind of up and out.
When you have space, it gives your imagination a lot of creativity.
Absolutely.
Especially when you can be outside.
Yep.
I was fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time outside as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that must have been great.
Well, that was one of the reasons, like I say, we wanted to be back, because that's one thing. I mean, living in the city, which I had been for so long at that point, you have to make the effort to find sprawling outdoor time.
Of course.
You know, it's a planned activity. It's not a spontaneous, I'm going to run out the back door and be gone for a couple hours.
Right. We'll be up at the Cascades this weekend.
Right, exactly. So, but we knew that coming back to Indiana, we certainly weren't going to find the opportunities in the professional theater realm that we had in Chicago, in Portland. Even Indianapolis is, as you know, lively a theater community as it has, not the volume of
right.
professional
like
experiences.
Chicago, New York,
absolutely. And as I say, at that time, even Portland was just
a lot of theater.
Yeah, it was rife with it. So we understood that. We were fortunate when we came back to that. The community theater in Muncie, the historic Muncie Civic Theater, where I had performed when I was going to college. It was where I saw my first big play in a theater on a field trip as probably a second or third grader. Went to see a Christmas Carol at the Muncie Civic Theater. Images that stuck with me my entire life. They needed an executive director, and so I was coming into town right at that time, and that all lined up, and I got the opportunity to lead that organization for a number of years upon our return to the community, and that was incredibly rewarding and a really great experience. And it also kind of got me back into the nonprofit arena of producing, mm-hmm. and that funding model, which is very different than commercial theater funding models.
Cap and Hat Inc.
A little bit. A lot of receptions and a lot of grant writing, so much grant writing.
Of course.
And I, stepped up to that. I took a course in grant writing and kind of boned up on that aspect of it, which was, in all my experience, something I hadn't really done a lot of before. When we were building the company in Portland, my wife did that. She had started her university career in a business degree, so she had a really great business mind. She still does all of our books,
good.
our personal books, and pays the bills. But she had done the grant writing for us out in Portland, but it was on me here, and so I took the course and learned how to do it and kind of got up to speed on that. So that was terrific. But at some point...
I bet she helped with your homework.
A little bit. Well, she was doing her own at the time. She ended up, once we had the kids, she decided to finish up her degree and got her doctorate in music, and so that she could enter the university teaching life.
Okay.
And has done that
You got to do the
since.
PhD for that.
Right. So she ended up getting a DM, a Doctor of Music, at Ball State over there near where we were in Muncie. But at some point, I began to miss the professional level of the art and the craft, and there's a kind of a ceiling at the community theater level because by design, and the beauty of it is that anybody that walks through the door that wants to be involved, there's a place
For you.
That puts a lot of responsibility on the management team to fill in gaps that are inevitably going to be there in order to really make the production happen. And it was just a crapshoot every show as to which gaps those were going to be, depending on who the rest of the volunteers were that had walked through the door for that show. So it was a lot of juggling and moving parts. Whereas at the professional level, you at least, the structure is in place. The jobs are defined. The job descriptions are locked in, and that's a well-oiled machine that's been developed over decades. That this is how it works in the professional field, and so I started once the kids were kind of in school and I could branch out a little bit. I started getting involved here in Indianapolis at the professional theaters. I'm a union actor, so there's an actors union, and if you're a member of the union, you can only work as a performer at union houses.
Okay.
And there are a limited number of those here in town. IRT and the Phoenix and Beef and Boards and ATI, and a couple others have they can do guest contracts and things like that, but as a part of their regular operating structure, they're not technically union houses. So of these four, as a performer and as a director, as I mentioned earlier, my kind of bent and aesthetic is towards comedy, and particularly towards broad comedy, slapstick comedy, old vaudeville style comedy.
Right.
That's my bread and butter. And as a performer, I'm not the leading man type. I was always the character actor. I was the funny sidekick or the
Alfie
wacky
Doolittle and Murray the cop.
Right.
Yeah.
So IRT and Phoenix not really doing that kind of material regularly. So
Yes.
Beef and Boards and ATI ended up being
That's
where I
more along that line.
was spending most of my time. Yeah, and really loved the experiences at ATI because it kind of the company feel, the family feel, that sense of collaboration is really it really jumped out at me in those experiences, and got to play some iconic roles that I loved. As you say, Murray the Cop was a great experience. Alfie Doolittle's a role that I've coveted my entire life, but hadn't been old enough to really pull off until it came around at ATI. And the thing I loved about that experience also, which is also something I love about ATI, is to take a large-scale show like that. You usually think of shows like My Fair Lady or other shows they've done like Sweeney Todd or Gypsy as being big productions with chorus of dozens and big moving sets that intricately detail each setting within the show. The confines of the studio theater are such that physically that kind of stagecraft is just not an option. But ATI
to really work on imagination.
Well, but more than that is to design and craft the storytelling of the show to fit that space. And what it does, the experience that I've had there as both a performer and an audience member, is that it focuses the audience's attention on the acting, the storytelling, the words. I think of seeing shows now in those large scale productions, the touring companies and the big Broadway shows. So much attention is distracted by the technical aspects of the show, by the crazy effects and the big moving sets and how did they do that, and just the sheer size and scope of it all, that without even knowing it, I think an element of that, the nuance of the storytelling, gets lost. And I think just in the name of the company, Actors Theater of Indiana, it puts the focus on the actors, not that the technical aspects of the shows are secondary, but they're considered in such an integral way of telling the story in that space, and not crowding it up with 30 people, but being able to tell this story with just 10 people, just 12 people. And then you're really focusing and paying attention to every word and every nuance, because there aren't distractions of various kinds. It's pure storytelling. And so I really came to love that experience at ATI. It's very unique. It's unique among all of the other experiences I've had here regionally. And feels very much... sometimes it's hard to be a patron at the theater when it's your career. I love going to the theater, but it's not always... I know I'm having a different experience than 98% of the people around me, because I'm seeing things through a different filter.
You see things that other people... It's like people that do music and do film and even TV. It's sort of like they know the production, and a lot of them don't even see their movies or listen to their recordings, because it's in the can, it's done, it's out there, and it's really for someone else.
Where I have always continued to be thrilled as an audience member, almost consistently, is in Broadway theaters in New York. There's something about the history, the setting of the theater itself, the environment outside as you're walking in, and knowing what it's going to be when you walk out, and knowing that what you're seeing on stage is the highest level of skill that you could hope to have this story told to you through. And that same, not exactly that, but that same feeling of being a thrilled patron is something I get at ATI as well.
Gotcha.
Every time I come as a patron to see an ATI show, I have that same thrill as when I walk into the Broadway houses, and walk out feeling similar. So in my mind, it's kind of the ATI's place in the community is kind of the sort of the Broadway lovers' home.
Gotcha.
If that's an experience you love and crave, you're going to get that experience here. You're going to see well-crafted, well-considered, intricately designed for the space, unique experiences done at the highest skill level. And so when the opportunity came available here within the last year, there had been a bit of change in the organizational structure at ATI, and the opportunity was there for me to become involved at the staff level. I was thrilled to be able to have the time and ability to do that.
Well, Darrin, that's great. Tell us what's coming up.
Well, we're kind of jumping into the rest of our current season after the first of the year. We have 2 more productions left in the first of the year in our main stage series. Route 66 is coming up next in February. One of the great jukebox musicals. It's a great mix of songs, from jazz, Great American Songbook, to some kind of poppy, rocky stuff, all to do with travel and being on the road in America.
Do you have the tune in the show?
Oh, sure, yeah. Get your kicks on Route 66.
I had a program on WITT about 10 years ago or so. It was called Standards, and the theme was Route 66.
Oh, yeah.
That was the intro.
Got it. So this show is going to be right up that same alley. Songs you might expect to hear about being on the road and being on Route 66, and also kind of that nostalgia of that when America was freshly on the roads, and those interstates were brand new. And right. Then we follow that up in the spring with Forbidden Broadway. We've done that a couple of times, but it's unique every time. So Forbidden Broadway is a New York institution. It's been playing off-Broadway in New York for a long time. I want to say decades. I know it's at least 25 years, maybe longer. But they skewer or parody Broadway shows. And the show in New York changes annually based on whatever's playing in town at that
mix
time.
It up.
Yeah.
So it's immediate satire.
Exactly. Sort of SNL, Second City-ish level satire
kind of skits.
Right, of the current batch of Broadway shows. So they license a version of that Forbidden Broadway for theaters around the country to do, but it's kind of the best of. It's the classics, the evergreen shows, the Annies and the Les Mis and the Cats and Phantom and whatever. But here we have a couple of our founders are very good friends with one of the original New York performers, who is a collaborator of the guy who writes the shows, and still continues to be involved and is friends with that person. So that contact brings to us, every time we do a version of the show, some of the new stuff. So every time we do the show, there's new current material being put into it that you are not going to see anywhere else other than that New York production.
Gotcha.
So that makes it really unique. And again, it's a Broadway lover's delight, because you're getting to kind of poke fun at things that you love.
It's the comical version of the old shows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In addition to that, we've still got 2 more sort of projects in our lab series. So the lab series is something I'm really excited about, and one of the reasons I was excited to come onto the staff to kind of help foster the program. It's a new works program that's been going at ATI for years. I've had the good fortune to direct 3 of the previous shows that they've done, but they take either new authors or existing playwrights or seasoned playwrights who have a new script that it's in the early stages, or it's a little further along in development, but they need to be able to hear it out loud, hear actors inhabiting the roles and saying the words, and get a little audience feedback without having to fully produce it and get into costumes and sets and things like that. Just a reading of the script. And so we've been doing that. We have another session coming up in the spring with a local Indianapolis playwright. Paige Scott has written a play called It Girl. It's the story of Evelyn Nesbit, the girl on the swing, and Stanford
I know what the
White.
It Girl was about, but I think I've heard of her name.
Scandalous, the trial of the century back in the 20s. Architect Stanford White was murdered, and it was all a love triangle with Evelyn Nesbit, this vaudeville star. So it's a sort of a play about that story. So we're doing a reading of that in the spring, and that's a partnership that we have with the Carmel Clay Public Library. So we do the readings at the library in one of their community rooms, and it's free. People come and they listen to the reading, and then afterwards we do a Q&A, and they kind of give feedback on what they've just heard. And then in the summer, we're doing something really unique with the lab series that we've not done before, which is called a DIY playwriting lab. And we're going to have a professional playwriting instructor and mentor guide I think up to 10 or 12 folks who sign up for the project over the course of 3 or 4 nights during the week, give them prompts and suggestions and help them develop a short scene, maybe a page or so of material, dialogue or a monologue or something that's in their head. And then at the end of the week, professional actors will then read aloud whatever those community playwrights have written under the mentorship of their teacher during the week. So it's kind of an opportunity for the community to get hands-on involved and really become actively involved in the process themselves, and hopefully spark some ideas and some creativity and some burgeoning playwrights here in the community.
So, well, fabulous. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for the interest and taking the time. This has been a pleasure.
Well, very much. Thank you, Darrin. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Omnibus Show. We're with Darrin Murrell today, who's the Associate Artistic Director at the Actors Theater of Indiana here in Carmel, Indiana. And we're here at Feinstein's. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the Hotel Carmichael. We look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Omnibus Show.
If you enjoyed this program, please like, share, and subscribe to continue the conversation. For the Omnibus Show newsletter, please sign up at theomnibusshow.com.